Is Jen? Yeah. Is Jen there?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Jen.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Such a boomer way to start a Zoom call.
Yeah,
waving.
that's the
Hello.
best
Half
way.
off camera. Is Jen there? Honey, have you seen my spectacles? Oh, they're on my head.
I do Zoom like a boomer. I do.
I know. You're all going to have to put up with needlepoint Frida because she's not going to join us here.
That's all right. That's all right. We got one dog.
Tally's representing for Muffin and Frida.
Yeah, well, I just showed the muffin.
Yes. Perfect.
I should count myself grateful that Micah says we have one dog. when I'm out on my walks, little children in prams will often reach over, point at Frida, and say "dog," and then point at me and say "dog."
Nice. You should take it as a compliment, Steve.
No.
It is a compliment for you, Steve. So, Adrian.
Yes.
Can you, Micah, can you explain a bit what the story is about?
Yes. So I have it. I read it on Kindle here.
Yeah, me too.
But essentially, it is a historical fiction telling of the life of Emperor Hadrian in Rome. It was originally published, I believe, in the 50s.
Yep.
If I'm right in thinking that. Marguerite Yourcenar, for the pronunciation of her last name. And it sort of goes through Hadrian at the end of his life, as he is approaching death, drafting a letter, essentially telling his life story, and sort of recounting the highs and the lows from his life, sort of in sort of a stream of consciousness type form, very, very intimate, very conversational, just sort of recounting the closing.
And the letter is for
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, his adoptive son.
His adopted son, who then obviously went on to write his own works and be quite an influential figure. Which I did not realize the connection with Marcus Aurelius until I read this book between him and Emperor Hadrian. So I found that very interesting. But I'm not very well read in my Roman text at all, though. So this was a good introduction for me in that regard.
Steve, how many times have you read the memoirs?
Could we perhaps indulge in my reviewer's instincts and back up just a bit? Could we tell viewers from 10 years from now what this is and what event it's a part of and who Hadrian is?
Of course.
Could we maybe just take a minute to contextualize? This is Classics and Company.
Okay, this is Classics and Company, a year-long reading event that is hosted by Annabelle and myself, and Steve and Jen for this month's book, where we take one work of classic literature, we read it over about a month and a half, and then at the end we try to have a Zoom discussion like this that we're having here today, sort of doing a wrap-up of our thoughts for the read. Typically, it will be a first-time read for Anne and myself and our co-host, and then Steve, you have read everyone that we'll be doing, so you can give us some good context there. And today we're talking about Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar.
Which is about the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who was a successor to the Roman Emperor Trajan. He was the second of the so-called Spanish emperors. Okay. And he ushered in the Antonine era that Edward Gibbon, at the beginning of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, famously described as the golden era of Roman history, the time when you would have wanted to live if you'd picked a time period in Roman history. Whether he's right or not about that is often cited. It's cited in that Hadrian biography right behind Jen. So there you go. There's some context.
Jen, you have read a lot of quite a few books around Hadrian, around his real persona. Can you tell more about that?
Well, the most fun thing is that if you read anything that's been published since the 1960s, almost all the authors come to it having read this, and you can sometimes see them wrestling with trying to present the history in a neutral way that isn't through whatever bias they picked up by reading that novel before they started researching the history.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is really fun in terms of like where it sits in the cultural space.
Yeah.
Right.
But a lot often historians.
Oh yeah. The Three Musketeers caused historians to do the same thing, and so did The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. Nobody could write about Richard III without talking about a book that sold more than all of them put together.
Yeah. But a lot of historians say of their line of work that they are artists and not so much scientists, because they have to make so many connections with different kinds of material, but that is often incomplete, that they have to fill in that much of themselves, that they invent themselves to make it work. So they say it's not really a science, it's a matter of art and connecting the dots. So once you have a flower, and when you connect the other dots, you have a face, but the numbers are correct, but the way they connect it is not always correct. And that's why they call themselves artists more than scientists. Yeah. Because it's always, history is a matter of interpretation.
Right.
Especially when we go this far back.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was a historian who said, imagine a basketball stadium, a basketball court, that size. So a huge space. Give yourself a small bag of octagonal tiles.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't have holes. They're octagonal, meaning they'll all fit with each other.
Yeah.
Give yourself a small bag of that. Spill that in the middle of a basketball court, and you have to make a picture that looks like the whole thing from that little bag of tiles. And his point was, you could assemble them in any number of ways. They'll and still have something like a coherent picture.
Yeah.
The thing is, we're never going to get Hadrian assembled in any other way than this. This is going to happen. Unfortunately, I think. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of different ways that the little pieces could be interpreted, I think.
But I believe that Yourcenar really did a terrific job of writing fiction, but with so much heart and intelligence and knowledge that it's almost as if it's real, that it's real. You can picture him writing, and that's so powerful, I think.
It's why
and so beautiful, so well written.
You'll always find this book in the history section of used bookstores. I'm proud of how many times that's happened. People, a history, a bookseller doesn't maybe know the period or the book, will see it and think, oh, okay, so this guy named Hadrian wrote his memoirs. So it goes to the Roman history section. When actually Hadrian did write an autobiography, and we don't have it. Don't have any of it.
Oh, interesting.
It's a bit of a shame. It's just random chance. That
was going to be a question I was going to ask, is if there were any source documents still remaining from Hadrian. So we don't have anything that he wrote.
Aren't there a few poems that were in the memoirs that had ended up being used as like a writing exercise 500 years later? And that's
the frustrating thing about the memoir, is that process where a later writer excerpts a large amount of an earlier work is how we know about a large amount of earlier work, not just Hadrian. Why? It's just random chance that we don't have huge excerpts from his autobiography. Instead, we have his dumb poetry. But so this was Anne, you mentioned how beautifully this is done. So are we all agreed on that? Do you all agree that this was an amazing reading experience?
Oh, yes.
For me, yes.
Yes.
Then you were less convinced, no?
How do I put this? I could appreciate the style, but it wasn't necessarily the style. And maybe this is because I'm a grumpy, cynical person, but I was reading it and thinking, is she trying to mimic what somebody in the 20s to the 50s would have imagined this Roman emperor to write with? And
interesting.
Is that manipulating me as the audience? And is this a natural choice?
Like, through what lens was she trying to portray
exactly,
Hadrian?
Exactly. Because it felt so intentional to me.
It wasn't a natural choice. It was a real choice that she wanted to. She used very rather archaic language, to make it feel more ancient. But she wrote differently. When you read her other works, she doesn't use that style of language. No, it was intentional.
Yeah, and so that felt to me very
Forced.
well, so intentional that it took me out of it. So I wasn't thinking, I'm not reading this as a story on its own. I'm reading it and thinking about what she was designing and how she would have written it differently if it weren't specifically this period and in this voice. And so I felt like I was reading it at a remove, which is still fun. And honestly, I would rather read something that way than just be like, okay, I'm carried along in the story. So as an experience, I enjoyed that a lot, but I can't say that I was being carried along in the story because I was more paying attention to the stylistic choices she was making and why they were being made. And
have any of you ever read this before?
Nope.
And have any of you ever been to Tivoli, to any of the places where Hadrian lived?
I have not.
I have.
You have?
Yeah, I go to Italy quite often. I've never been to Greece. He was in love with Greece. He was. He called himself more a Hellenistic person.
Certainly, he was called that by the Romans, but not complimentary.
No, I know. But he loved Greece and the Greek way of life.
Right. So none of you.
I'm assuming you've been to all the places.
Well, I thought you were saying, have you been to the place in Spain where his family was from? And my answer to that was no, but a lot of the other places.
Well, it'd be Spain or, anywhere that you've been traveling.
Yeah.
Especially Athens, though. Athens or his own gardens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nope.
And the former Adrianople, of course.
Did you all read the same translation?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
By the partner
read
of,
both just to compare, but
You read both just for
I figured, okay, she approved it because it was her partner who was writing the translation, but I wanted to know, did she change anything along the way? So,
right.
Were you able to notice any discrepancies?
Not really discrepancies, but I think there are some style choices that are just because, kind of similarly, they're trying to get this archaic voice. Is what would an English-speaking audience expect from this Roman emperor? What would a French-speaking audience expect? And sometimes they're not exactly the same, just because the translations from Latin wouldn't have been the same that people would have been reading in those days. So I think there are some choices that are related to that rather than related to the two of them had a disagreement about how something should have gone. I think it's
more about
how it's going to ring to the audience. Yeah,
that's really fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's the double-edged sword of when you encounter a work of history or especially of literature, and you're told in a note that this translation was authorized and that the author of the work worked in close collaboration with the translator. I've seen so many people look at that and say, oh, well, there you go. That's the seal of approval. Like they don't know how human relationships work. That can work just as much against the thing as far as.
Right. You don't want to be too close necessarily.
That's true. I think it could cause some really serious discussions.
If I can ask a really broad question, what did you all think of it?
I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. It's a book where you start reading and you think already, I will read this again. Yeah.
It did seem very, I wasn't sure how I would take to it, how sort of if it would be one where you just sort of fall into it and you're able to be carried through the entire work, or if it's going to require a lot of sort of focused concentration in reading it to sort of push yourself through it. I was definitely taken through it very, very easily. Like Anne said, I found it very rereadable. It certainly seemed like a book that you can go back to and read again. Very enjoyable reading experience. I thought the writing itself was excellent, and especially sort of the feeling that it really was being written by Hadrian. It really did. It did feel very personal. Obviously, like I said, I haven't read very much of the history of the time, so I'm not at a knowledgeable standpoint from that regard. But it felt authentic.
And Jen, you said you weren't swept away, but you still enjoyed it?
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was a lot of fun to read. I mean, anything like this where you have so many references to different things in history that you're going to think of, like even outside of the story. I think that's just super entertaining.
Yeah, that was the biggest part that I loved, is that you want to read more about that period and about those, all the things that happened in his time that I really loved. You want to learn more about that period.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Steve,
indeed.
what were your impressions? Do you remember your impressions the first time you read it? I'm sure it's changed with all of your rereadings.
It has. It's changed drastically with rereadings, especially since I took a long time to write my own novel about Trajan, in which Hadrian is a major character. So I read all of the historiography, all of the inscriptions, all of the sources that that this author drew on for this book, and I arranged my tiles differently. Very much so. Very much so. Hadrian is very much the villain of my book on Trajan. Whereas here, well, obviously we're getting the story, filtered through him.
Right.
Yeah.
A self-pitying dude bro who thinks he's the greatest thing that's ever happened on Earth.
But it's the same with Caesar. With Caesar, we have a lot of texts that are still existing, but it's not necessarily the truth. It's his truth. Right. That when he writes about the Bello Gallico and stuff like that, he uses his way of thinking to justify his actions, but it's not necessarily positive for the other side.
Right, it's not necessarily the truth either. It's very filthy.
Well, it's his truth. There are many truths in the story.
I wonder why Judebro readers haven't embraced this book. I've sometimes wondered that in the past, because it's, a guy relating his life experiences to an impressionable other guy. And then I remember, of course, the book is written by a woman. That rules it out right there. No wonder they're going to ignore it. It's written by a woman. And also,
they'll just read Meditations.
Well, the one thing that everybody knows about Hadrian is his love affair with Antinous.
Yeah.
That makes it radioactive as well. How did you think that love affair was done in this book?
Quite well, I think. Quite moving, but without being sentimental.
Did you believe that it was a love affair? Did you believe that it was in any way voluntary on Antinous's part?
I don't think you can. I mean, it's hard to, not be a 21st century person and thinking, well, ew, that's a very young person. But at the same time, you imagine what would the standards have been then?
Yeah.
Think, well,
what were the
politically and
what
whatever
were the customs?
Yeah. And I mean, certainly.
He compared himself with Achilles and Patroclus, huh?
And we should point out, as Yourcenar has the novel point out, that that's not, it's not entirely fanciful. Well, I mean, when Hadrian was a young man, he was physically brave. He was scarred in battle at Sarmizegetusa. He received a scar in battle by leading his troops in a cavalry charge. Not every Roman emperor did that. Plenty of them claimed they did, but not everyone did. When he was young, he was beautiful and brave.
But so were we. Oh, you're still beautiful. That's true. But you're only 28.
He's still beautiful. He's not there yet.
Of course, one thing that struck me when I reread this book again on the Kindle, like a civilized person,
me too.
is something strikes me about this book every time I reread it that feels ungentlemanly to bring up in a live stream, which is how full of sheep dip the author is. If only she hadn't included that note, the famous biographical note about the circumstances under which she wrote this book. If she had left it out, if she'd left that note out, I wouldn't be tempted to think this way every time I reread the book. But instead, I am. It's because, you know, how dumb do you think your readers are?
I don't read notes. I never do.
She does a long exculpatory note about when she first thought up this book and how she first thought up this book, and there's not a word of it that's true. Not a single word of it. And
I don't read those.
Oh, she says, well, you know, of course, I cannot go into even a fraction of the detail necessary in the present scope of this work about the sources that I consulted. And then she goes on for 16 pages about the sources she consulted. She says, well, you know, this is a novel and it's really a philosophical examination of its subject, so I only scratched the surface of the sources that are involved. I don't want you thinking I did any more than that. And then she lists every single possible conceivable source of any kind in any medium. In 10 different languages, in Sumerian cuneiform. So you're reading her description, and then you're meant to read the list that she gives and think, oh, how impressive. So you're just being modest. It's not just you being modest, it's you lying. You're lying about, and the biggest lie of all about the Memoirs of Hadrian, we can clear it up here on Classics and Company and then just move on in diplomatic silence. The biggest lie of all about this book is when and why it was conceived. When an author writes a note at the end of her book going on and on and on about the earliest possible documentary evidence for when I thought this up, they are trying to hide when they really thought it up and why. This book, The Memoirs of Hadrian, has one origin and one origin only, and it's the money that Robert Graves got for I, Claudius. That's it. That's the only origin of this book. Never mind.
Well, even if that was the case, he did a very good job.
Oh, yes. I don't know. This is a rare example of a female author being as insecure as every male author who's ever lived. They usually aren't like that. I mean, this book was more critically praised than I, Claudius. It is a better book than I, Claudius, and it made more money than I, Claudius. All that's missing is a BBC miniseries. But I read that note again for this read along, and she's going on and on about there was a fragment in a steamer trunk and something came to me out of Ukraine. For Pete's sake, this isn't Umberto Eco. You thought you read I, Claudius like everybody else in the world and thought I can do that and I can do it better. And because you're Marguerite Yourcenar, you were right. Isn't that enough?
Right. That could have been her note. Because I read I, Claudius and I can do it better. Here it is.
Would have been a great note.
I did it better, Robert. Read it.
I got that off my chest. We don't have to dwell on it. I just wanted to vent. That's all. I don't know who she thinks she's fooling. But I have a question for Jen. Because we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that every book about Hadrian has to look at this book from now on. And I forget, is that Everett's biography?
No, this here is Thorsten Oper. He's with the British Museum. And when they did the Hadrian display, he compiled a bunch of stuff. So it's mostly a coffee table book, but I have it there because it has a great section in the introduction where he talks about, I don't know, both the joys and the horrors of people who put too much weight into this as history. So I thought that was fascinating because he devoted as much time to that as he does to things like coins and the whole sections about how they're deciding how he looked based on these coins versus those coins, what years they were in and all of that. And there's as much about this novel.
Wow. Oh, man. Well, that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
I've read 3 popular biographies of Hadrian, and they're all like that. The one that she cites in her little note about the book, I don't think Robert Graves' name is even mentioned in that book, in that note. But the one book that she describes is from before she wrote her book, a gigantic book on Hadrian. And of course, she trashes it in her polite French way. She trashes it. She says, it's big and it's authoritative, but you barely get any sense of the man. And the reason for that is because the historical record doesn't give us much of a sense of it. She's providing that in this book so brilliant. Did you get a sense? Oh, you must all have got a sense of the man in this book.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was very tangible. Yeah.
Did you get a sense of Antinous? Or of Hadrian's state-sponsored wife? Did you get a sense of any of those things?
No,
Maybe
not really.
Not quite as much, no.
No.
But
That's why
always
you have
think-
to listen to the opera or read the libretto, because they fill that in a way that I think is really interesting, given that it's inspired by this novel. So
oh, cool.
There's an art museum here in the United States that has, of course, a classics wing, where the room is just full of statues from ancient Rome. And I don't know if they still do it, but for a long time, they had Hadrian and his wife looking at each other. Just thousands of years later, they couldn't stand each other and they didn't love each other. But they're looking at each other in this room, even when the lights are off.
Nice.
Even when there's nobody there, they're staring at each other forever.
Eternal stare.
It was something that Hadrian shared in common with Trajan, which is that they took state-sponsored wives, and even though neither one of them, as far as we can tell, neither one of them was interested in women, sexually interested in women at all.
Interesting.
They were at least sexually interested in someone, which Marcus Aurelius can't say. So, but I don't want to digress into dude bros.
No.
So how did this go in terms of a reading experience? You all said it was your first time.
It read very quickly for me.
That's what I'm asking. Was it, what kind of reading experience was it? Was there ever a time? I mean, it reads quickly, but it is, as you've all pointed out, it's anachronistically written. It's written in a very ponderous Latinate style. Did that ever produce a time in the reading experience where you were thinking, oh, I have to get to this?
No, it wasn't a chore at all. No.
Oh, that's what I'm asking. Right? Was it? Was it a chore?
I felt that it was ponderous, but it was almost doing the thinking for you. So you were reading it, and it was giving you everything you needed. There weren't any moments when I was feeling confused or feeling like I needed to slow down to reread something to grasp it better. It was very much just sort of inhabiting his mind and his thought process, just sort of being fed that that information.
Good to know that it wasn't the slog. One thing I noticed about it this time around is that it definitely, for me, it definitely is. Just I put my paperback edition up there on the shelf.
Oh yes.
More as a mausoleum thing. I worried when I got that. It's not a very well-made paperback, and I worried when I got it that it wouldn't last a reading, and it was cracking like an old house in the wind. In no time at all, I moved straight to this thing. It's indestructible. First, I went to this what is this, Modern Library? Yeah, I went to the Modern Library, but it's so barbaric to read a bound and printed book. It's just so barbaric. This thing keeps my bookmark for me. It fits in my hand. It does. Take all the annotation I can do without me squirming to put it in the sides. Although all my annotation this time around were just notes on that final note of hers about how she came to write this book and what all the sources are. And she relied mostly on two sources who are relatively close to Hadrian's time period, but they could easily, the stuff that we need, she relied on a guy named Spartianus and also on Cassius Dio. And the people who wrote the books that she would have wanted to rely on, the books don't survive. We have hints of them, little bits and pieces of them, but they don't survive. Famously, Trajan's own book has only one half of one line that survives. When that thing was printed officially, and everywhere, it was everywhere. It was in every bookshop throughout the empire. It just goes to show you. It just goes to show you. Thank God for the internet.
Yes. That's fascinating.
So I wanted to ask, because I think you guys all read the same edition, what additional references or information or introductions or afterwards did you have in there?
I think this one has.
Oh, well,
the
standard Modern Library edition is all the one that I read for this time around.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
So it has, I don't even remember a perfunctory introduction. It has her introduction and then all of the supporting notes. So her author's note, her note on sources, her little disposition about.
Steve, I have the same exact. You sent me an e-copy of the edition you have, so mine is identical to yours in terms of introduction and afterwards.
Yeah, I didn't get much. I always expect that there will be a Penguin Classic edition with a brand new introduction.
Mm-hmm.
This has an introduction by Paul Bailey, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
That's not available in America. I don't.
What
think
is the most recent edition? Is that, Jen? Is that the most recent?
I believe so. Yeah, it is from. Actually, no. This probably is not the most recent because this is. Right, maybe it is from 2000 though, so
okay,
not that recent.
Steve, do you think we'll see this in a Penguin Classics edition?
Not in America, no. No, but not because I'm avoiding diatribes on all sides here. America is about to enter into a phase of revanchist, right-wing, censorious Puritanism that will make the actual Puritans look like the 60s, the hippies at Woodstock. And this is a book about a man, it's in large part extolling a passionate erotic relationship with another man. So this will be forbidden to be read. It won't get another translation. It won't be in bookstores. There won't be bookstores. But that's just my own dystopian idea of what's coming. So if I'm wrong, I would love it. I would love it if there were a Norton Critical edition of this, because that would give somebody a chance to earn some money by translating all of the critical responses to this that have been done in French literary periodicals that have never been done, never been translated to English. And a lot of those things from the 60s, when this book had a huge vogue, I would love to see them brought into English. This has had a critical response all over the world. A Norton Critical edition would practically assemble itself. I don't know that we'll ever see it. It would be great, but I don't know if we'll ever see it. I'm curious to know if this made any of you want Antinous' book. Did you
Does it exist?
No.
Ah.
Well, there's plenty of fiction. There's plenty of historical. Oh my! The gays have not left this story alone. They go at it all the time, but I guess my broader question is: did you feel that Hadrian was lying in the course of the book? Did you feel like I'm getting an old man story, and like all old man stories, I should not believe this?
But those are two different things. Whether you should believe it and whether he's lying are not the same thing.
I didn't think he was lying intentionally.
He believes it probably. That doesn't mean
I don't think he was lying intentionally. I think it's the sort of the memory morphing that happens naturally with age, where you sort of attribute your current feelings and emotions onto your past experiences, and so everything sort of becomes a little bit more vague and amorphous. I don't think it was an intentional deception or intentional lying, but I certainly don't think everything unfolded exactly the way he's remembering it while writing.
And not just age, but if you're an emperor, you have a level of remove from real people.
Yes, and you're going to be very aware of how you are remembered and how you want to sort of slightly tweak events or change things just slightly to put you in a different light or better light. Right. So I don't think it was intentional lying, but I don't think it was necessarily completely accurate either. But
did that old man process happen with you, Micah? You don't have your old man sweater on, but you are the oldest person here.
Yes, I am the oldest person.
Is that happening with you? You trap young people into endless, tedious stories?
I push everyone away.
I've heard that can happen if you go to an old person's house in Boston, for instance. I've heard that you can be trapped into endless, tedious.
As an old person, I have to do it often.
I'm kind of curious to know, what was the thought with Micah and Anne? What was the thought process that put this on the list?
I'll have to hand it off to you, Anne, because I believe you selected this one for us.
One reason and one reason only, because Yourcenar is Belgian.
Perfect.
And I really wanted to. I never read anything of her work, and I really wanted to. And Hadrian seemed interesting, and I've heard so many good things about it. So that was the reason. That's the only silly reason.
It was a wonderful selection.
I'm being chastised here because I think I referred to her as French.
Yeah, but everybody does.
She was both. She was both, so it's okay.
There was a movie called Murder by Death. It was a spoof on classic murder mysteries. And there's a character in there who's supposed to be Hercule Poirot. And he's constantly saying throughout the movie, I'm not a Frenchie, I'm a Belgie. I feel reproved. But so how is this book viewed in Belgium? It must be
not the Flemish part doesn't know the book. There used to be a very good translation, but you can't find it anywhere. Not online, not in secondhand stores. You can't find it, and you have to be really, really lucky. It's out of print. So yeah, of course I can't speak for the French part. So there, I think they will know it and read it still. But here, this part of the country, no.
Anne, you mentioned that that you'd never read any Yourcenar.
No.
Is that true for the rest of you?
Yes, first time.
I had only read excerpts before, so.
And when you read this book, does it make you want to read her?
Yeah, of course.
It did.
It made me want to read a biography of her more than want to read more of her stuff, to be honest.
That was interesting.
Jen is just resolutely not spellbound by this book.
But that's difficult with Jen. She can be cruel when she reviews a book. Oh man!
There was an English language biography about 30 years ago. I think there was.
There are a couple. Yeah.
That was interesting.
I don't think I read it. I don't think I'd be up for reading it. The book, much like all the later histories of Hadrian, any biography of her would have to center around this novel. It would have to look over its shoulder all the time at this novel. And I don't know that I could stand that for 300 and something pages. I don't think I could do it.
Here in my part of the world, there's an other book by her that is regarded much higher, but I can't remember the name of the book. But there's one with there's a color
by the same author in the Folio Classique edition. It's like 2 pages long of stuff that they have that's of hers that's in publication.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So,
but there's a book with a color in the title, black or red, or I don't know what
black.
it was. Yeah, that's her highest regarded book.
Oh, interesting.
Higher than Memoirs of Hadrian?
Yeah.
Why?
Hadrian is when they say, well, Marguerite Yourcenar, author of. It's can you find the title, Jen?
Oeuvre Noire.
Yeah, that's the title that is always mentioned, always first. Yeah.
What? Yeah. But there are at least 3 of her books in here that they have extended editions of. Hadrian, that one, and actually several. So I mean, she has enough books that are famous enough that they get the extended editions.
What?
So
I guess it's quintessentially American of me, isn't it? That I immediately want to say that it outsold all of them by 100,000 times. It doesn't have to boil down to money. The French are different from you and me. Money.
No.
But sometimes, books that are written by French authors, I feel more attached to because I know the culture and I can understand it more, while as an American or wherever you live in the world and you read it, you don't necessarily feel what's so important what they say, because for some it's a detail and for us it's a big thing. It's the way we experience things are different often. And
ways that you're culturally if it's culturally relevant to you.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just sort of
That's why, for instance, everybody talks about the classics and they say Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters but for us those are rarely mentioned as one of the greats. That we go more towards the German authors and the French and the Russians. Less America and England is less because it's less part of our culture. And for us also the Italians are very important, the Spanish. So yeah, it's different.
That's fascinating.
The main culture that I always think of when I read this book is the first century.
Yeah.
I sunk myself up to my eyeballs in it when I was writing a book on Trajan. So when I'm reading the Memoirs of Hadrian, I get to a certain line or a certain phrase, and I'm thinking, I know exactly where you got that. That's the first thing I think is, that's not you. That's a thing lodged in here that you just took from a source. And then my second thing is, but you shouldn't have done that because the source obviously made it up out of whole cloth. You just like the sound of it. That's all. She's assembling a Hadrian that she wants.
Of course. It's a collage.
Yeah, that's a one word for it.
It's a collage of fragments and bits and pieces, and she made it in one story. So yeah.
At the very least, I can be grateful that when she made her collage of Hadrian, she did not make the collage look like herself.
No.
Unlike I, Claudius, where you're just stuck. Talk about being stuck in a room with an old man rambling, self-aggrandizing stories about himself. Oh my God.
But is that not normal? Because she is a woman writing about a man. So it's more difficult to write about yourself because she's a woman, he's a man. It's different. Well, the experiences in life are different, for sure. So if she would have been a man, it would be more difficult for her to not put herself as much in it.
And the French critics went wild with that, with the homophobia that is rife, or was rife in French. One, I forget, you would probably know, Anne, or know better than I would. There was a famous literary critic for Le Monde that did a notorious appreciative essay of this book, in which he, on his third wife, and with advanced alcoholism, says that the reason this works so well, the book works so well, is because Yourcenar captures the womanly essence of a man in love with a younger man. and critics of the critic went crazy, saying, well, you don't have to have a womanly essence to love him. You're letting your nature show just a little there. And I forget his name. I'm completely blanking on his name. He wrote 1,000 reviews. None of them has ever been translated into English. And that's why a Norton critical edition of Memoirs of Hadrian would be great. Give us a new translation. Give us a translation that doesn't have anything, that doesn't owe anything to Yourcenar herself. And then load it with essays. That would be wonderful.
That's why I didn't read the notes or the forward. I want just the book.
Oh,
then afterwards I can choose, but I didn't feel the need to know the reason why.
Her note about the
notes are the best part.
You have to read at least her essay about how. No, I really did think this up before I, Claudius. You have to read that at least. It's just masterfully done.
Okay, I will.
So what is next for Classics and Company? I ought to know that.
The Decameron starts today.
What was that?
The Decameron.
Yeah. It starts today.
Oh my.
Yes.
Oh, it's not. My copy is not within reach. Oh,
mine isn't either. Yeah, that starts today, and then we finish that middle of August. Anne, is that correct? August 15th. Okay. So about a month and a half for the next one.
And normally Tom LA Books is a co-host.
Yes. And of course, Steve.
So will there be a 4-part discussion for the Decameron?
Let's hope so.
Hopefully.
But Tom is so good at those things, at analyzing and stuff.
When it comes to that 4-part discussion of the Decameron, is there any chance that you and Micah will simply mute your microphones?
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's
probably.
certainly going to be a necessity.
I'll
for
turn
you
my
to do
camera
that.
off even. I'll just sit here. I'll just
Tom
smile.
and I are not going to shut up about
I'll just
Boccaccio.
paste a picture of myself. I won't even be here.
Yes, just cartoon pictures.
You know what, Steve? It'll just be you and Tom. Ann and I won't even be there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We'll just have a
Oh,
different
wow.
Zoom call.
We did a lot when he was here. When he came to visit, we did a lot of talking about Boccaccio, although we talked about other authors more. Oh, my, though.
So that'll be next for
I
classic.
feel so sorry for Micah and Ann. You're not going to get a word in edgewise.
It'll be all right. It's my first time reading it. I'll just soak in the knowledge.
Your first time reading Boccaccio. Good Lord.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that this thread here, there are some similarities between the Memoirs of Hadrian and certain aspects of the Decameron.
No idea.
It must be coincidental.
I think it is.
Purely coincidental. No, I chose Decameron because I wanted to do something Italian, and yeah, Dante is. We can't top what Tom from Tom LA Books has done. Tomasino, it's so wonderful. His videos about Dante is so wonderfully done. So I thought,
Yes, those of you who are watching who
Hmm?
maybe don't know what we're talking about a booktuber named Tom LA Books.
Yeah.
Series Canto by Canto of the Divine Comedy is must view it, simply must view it. And then he won my heart by going to my beloved Ariosto. It's just also incredible viewing. I'm hoping that somewhere down the line, there's an Italian poet named Ugo Foscolo, who I absolutely love. And what a joy it would be to hear Tom read those verses. So but
well,
first
we have next year and the year after. We are not in a rush.
No, certainly not.
So what is the final verdict on this book?
For me, 5-star read. Yeah.
And
Highly,
what does that
highly would recommend it.
Yeah.
So, but it's not a universal response, right? I have lost any recollection of my initial responses to this book. But in terms of the rest of the three of you, Jen was not swept away by it, but really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So, but that also can be a 5-star review, right? I mean, was this all three of you an excellent book?
Yeah.
Something you would recommend?
I would recommend it. I would reread
and
it.
it's a book you won't forget. You've read. You can read a book and then you really have to look it up. Have I read this? And then you have to go to Goodreads or whatever. No, this one you will remember that you have read it and enjoyed it, and that there were beautiful passages in it and some interesting thoughts. And yeah, so for me, I will definitely talk about it within years to come.
But to be fair, I think some of the memorability has to be because it's so interwoven with other bits of culture, and so you to various things.
Just a smart thing
like that.
Yeah, that's just a smart thing that she did. It's so interesting.
It's very folded. It's folded and folded. That's the thing you were mentioning about the invitation to reread. You're reading it and you know you're going to reread it.
Yeah.
Which not every book, like you say, some books you read them, and I hate to say this, Micah, but Edgar Sawtelle was one of those books for me.
Really?
I got to page 50 and thought, okay, so this is going to be another book where all the dogs are actually humans, and then it just went on and on with dog humans for the rest of the thing. I remember almost nothing about the melodrama. I think somebody pushes somebody down a flight of stairs.
Yep.
But otherwise,
oh, it's fascinating to hear.
It would have been an absolute bullseye for me for a number of reasons, and instead of just
Which book is that?
I have it right here. It's the story of Edgar Sawtelle by David Wroblewski. And it's sort of a modern retelling of Hamlet set in the believe it's Wisconsin, Minnesota.
That's the American Midwest.
Yeah, American Midwest.
The American Midwest.
And it centers around a family that is they breed a fictional species of dog that is incredibly emotive and incredibly human. And then sort of the story that it's a generational story that surrounds this fictional dog breed essentially. And Steve, you just said it just didn't land.
No, the publicist told me when the thing was in galley, the publicist said, "Have I got a book for you? This thing reads like it was written for you."
Right.
And no,
I would have thought so.
It didn't happen. The dogs are all humans. So
yeah.
You know what I mean, the guy who wrote there was a book a long time ago called Knopp's Trials, which is also told from the point of view, it's also full of dogs, and they're all humans.
Interesting.
How interesting is that? These are alien beings that we have shaped among us. Aren't you, baby? You're an alien being.
Wonderful.
But again, Edgar Sawtelle, the author of Edgar Sawtelle, will never need to work another day in his life. This book has the option for the screen alone made him, the author, independently wealthy, but it was also translated into every language in the world. It was reprinted 1 million times. It's been sold in 1 million book clubs. And the authors had to do 1 million interviews. And once again, there is a dovetail with Memoirs of Hadrian, because the author, because he is insecure, has had to go on at enormous length about how these ideas, they sort of formulated inside.
Well, and Steve, what I can tell, this is his only book.
Right. But when he gives interviews like that, he is lying.
Right.
The inspiration from this book is another book. He saw, American Midwest, retell a Shakespeare play in the present day, get translated into every language in the world, make me a pile of money. Is that 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley? Oh, yeah. Did I read that when I was a student? Yeah. Did I think I want a piece of that? Yeah, I did. I thought I want a piece of that.
Interesting.
I don't know who these authors think they're fooling. I mean, Harold Bloom wrote The Anxiety of Influence a long time ago. He gave us a blueprint to trace these things a long time ago. Still, I didn't like 1,000 Acres either. So it's just as well. Whereas with I, Claudius and Memoirs of Hadrian, I thought both were successes, just enormous successes. Well, they don't ever actually rise. I mean, they don't rise, neither one of them. Memoirs of Hadrian never rises above what Jen's talking about, which is that this is mired in its sources. It's mired in rubbings on monuments, parchments, and translations. There's no way, it doesn't ever get above that. I think in the way that, for instance, I don't think you ever have those thoughts about Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I think you need someone like me to boringly point out stuff like that, otherwise you would never think about it.
Yeah, but of course, for Hilary Mantel, it was easier to have access to a lot more work to do her research, because we have the internet, and because you can it's easier to travel when you want to go somewhere, you want to read about stuff.
Right, but I'm saying that she accessed all of that work and then decided to leave a lot of it behind. If you access all of the hundreds of people that Thomas Cromwell had racked and then executed, you don't write 3 novels in which he's Barack Obama.
No.
Leave all that behind in order
Yeah. She was really well informed, that's for sure.
There are some ways that you can be really well informed on a metatextual level about the Decameron, but they're all illegal. So don't do them. Don't do them. Don't try to be that informed about the Decameron. You're going to need. I
have no idea. I'm going in with I'm blank, so I'm pure still. So
yeah,
you won't be when you're done. You're about to lose.
I think so.
In fact, because it's the Decameron, you're not just going to lose your innocence. You're going to lose the innocence of everyone in your block. They're all going to they're going to feel it go away, and they're going to say, "What's going on here? Oh wait, somebody nearby must be reading the Decameron."
What are you reading?
Is this the first reading as well, Micah?
Yes.
And are you reading the Rebhorn translation?
I have not selected a translation yet, so most likely yes. from your recommendation.
Feedback of the Red Horn translation, which is probably the one you want.
Perfect.
It has the best blurbs.
Very interesting.
Oh, is it the Steve Donahue blurb?
Yes. I'm not blurbed on any translation of the Memoirs of Hadrian. I guess that's why I kind of want a new translation.
Right. Absolutely.
But I can creep into the lives of as many book readers as possible. You saw Aaron Facer did a reading roundup just the other day. He was his first read of Crime and Punishment. He's holding up a version with my name on the cover. It's just because I'm creeping into all of your bookcases. But with the Memoirs of Hadrian, you're free. I have never done that. I've never been connected with it in any way.
Guys, I think we're almost an hour talking about an hour. So I think that's all that we could say about the Decameron and, of course, the Memoirs of Hadrian. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Jen, for co-hosting, and Steve, of course, with all your knowledge, and Micah, thank you for being there.
Absolutely. Thank you all. This has been wonderful.
Thanks. This was fun.
Is there any chance for a parting view of Callie?
No. Come.
T-Dog.
Ooh. Ooh.
There we go.
We go.
Look at that face. Oh, I used to have smooth-faced dogs. And I now am in the little club. I also once had a black and white dog. There's something special about black and white dogs, and I finally had one.
You tell? You say hi?
Ooh.
Oh, you have to follow Jen on Instagram, because she posts Tally Dog every single day. So yeah, it's her best. It's her best.
Such a wonderful commentary on society when you did one post on Instagram about the discarded face mask of the day, and then you got up to thousands. I only noticed how many I was seeing on the sidewalk because of your Instagram. Because suddenly you couldn't do a dog walk without encountering them everywhere. Although I don't know.
Now she has transferred to wardrobe, so
yes,
it's the shirt of the day.
Can you really do a whole series on discarded items of clothing? Where do you live anyway? What's going on over there?
It's a good question, isn't it? Where does it all come from?
So yeah, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you for watching, everybody, and hope that you join us in the Discord to read the Decameron. And thanks everybody.
Everyone,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.